Hey, Mason here. So just wanted to do an update for my character, as my character has hit the Profound Viable benchmark. So we're still doing early Profound, so again, damage is a little bit lacking and survivability is a little bit on the lower side. However, it's always like this for Torchlight characters. You're trying to push into the next benchmark or the next tier of maps so that you can farm more currency than you could in the previous one, and then you would use the ability to farm in that tier to then gear up to do that tier even faster. So obviously, let's start with the most important thing, the budget. This cost me around 2.7k FE from the previous video to upgrade to this stage, or if you add up the previous video's prices, so 1.5k plus 2.7k, around 4.3k FE to get into this stage of the character. So in this video, I'll go around three things. The first thing will be the state of the character. The second thing will be how I efficiently upgrade while keeping my FE cost as low as possible. And the third thing will be a full checklist on exactly what I upgraded step by step, as well as each DPS benchmark you can expect to get from these upgrades. If you enjoy this kind of content, feel free to like and subscribe. I'll be continuing to making updates for this character and for the future leagues I'll play Torchlight in. Alright, straight to the character. I'm just going to show you the dummy DPS. Our peak is around 104 billion DPS, however it does go high depending on crits, and the survivability is 74k right now, and it goes up to 80k depending on conditions as well. I'm going to be walking over the character in full, so we're going to go over gear, going to go over skills, going to go over etc. Pretty much all the pieces. I'm going to talk about some key interactions I used to scale my damage efficiently and try and explain them to the best of my ability. And then hopefully you can use this knowledge and this understanding to either approach your own build by understanding it and understanding where the scaling vectors come from, or again, you could try my build as well, because this build I think performed very well for its cost. All right, let's start with the skills since it's the most important. So playing Groundshaker, in case you've never seen the skill before, it pretty much just hits the ground and leaves a big puddle. It's an earthquake from PoE, like this. Groundshaker is automated using activation medium instruction, and we have a setup with 1.1 seconds between triggers. 1.1 is very important. So this value here is very important because it matches up with the Groundshaker effect, which gets a demolition charge every 3 seconds. Pretty much you need to gain a charge before your medium comes up, which means you need to gain a charge within 1.1 second. For my character, I'm actually a little bit over. The way you benchmark this is you look through the demolition charge restoration speed right here. The benchmark for a 1 second medium is 200% here. The benchmark for a 0.9 second medium is 233% here, so a little bit more than those values. And a benchmark for the previous one is 270%. I will have my spreadsheet linked in the description below with these benchmarks you can see right here. So in this case, 200% for 1 second, 233% for 0.9, and 172% for 1.1. You need a tiny bit more than those values, as well as the DPS increases from going up each bracket. Because I'm at 1.1, that means I can very easily go up to 0.9 and gain around a 20% DPS boost. So instead from going from 110 billion or 120 billion, I'd go to maybe 150 billion or so. One thing to keep in mind about what I just discussed is that I actually don't want to go below 1 second at this current stage of my character, because I'm using Cohesion here to crush my crit chance. Cohesion here gives you 50% multiplicative crit, so it's pretty much just plus times 0.5, and so that only applies if my skill is more than 1 second on the activation medium. As soon as I go below 1 second, that means only every second attack will crit. We'll get this crit bonus from Cohesion here. So just keep that in mind for my current state of the character. There's ways that you can fix that, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. Now for the rest of the skills, I'm just going to go through them briefly. Resurrection Walkout, we're using activation medium Demolisher. We can use this because we're using Demolisher charges from our Groundshakers. Raging Warcry, I'm actually using activation medium Preparation, and it's because I need to have 100% uptime, simply because it gives me demolition charge recovery. I don't want to rely on proccing a Groundshaker to get this active, which will then give me the demolition charge recovery. I want to always have this stat so I can always meet the benchmark that my activation medium is running at. So these mediums right here. And Timid here, I'm using Demolisher again with increased area and no terrain, whatever it's called, support. Simply because you activate your Groundshaker so many times, which means you cast Timid so often, so there's not really any concern about actually having uptime with that. For my auras, I'm using Precise Cruelty, I'm using Fire Magus, I'm using Flame Focus, and I'm using Swiftness. Just keep in mind that I have no reservation aura mana efficiency on my character, so the aura reservation mod, whatever it's called. And so you should be able to fit all these auras in if you have this exact setup. Just make sure your restraints are level 20, because you will need that to actually barely slot it in. You can see here that I'm at 2.7% sealed mana. So I'm barely making all my auras onto my character. All right, that pretty much covers it for skills. There are a few options for budget if you don't have the money. The first thing would be these two slots here. I'll briefly show you what they look like. So specifically for Groundshaker, you have a few options. And let me just pull up the marker for that. You have, the best is this one because of most damage, plus this one. or you can use Epicenter plus Cripple, right? So you can either use these two together, or you can either use these two together. You cannot cross between these. There's some weird interaction that just doesn't make it work. And again, if you watch my earlier videos, we use this for mobility in the very early game before we get the activation mediums, which are generally the most expensive piece for the build to automate it as well. All right, that pretty much covers the skills. I'm going to now walk over the gear. Let's start with top to bottom. So I'm going to talk about MagmaSkull here. This is a new helmet that was added this league, and it's very cheap. No one's using this helmet. You see here that my corruption specifically is like less than 30 FE. And this is how I'm primarily scaling my damage compared to other Rosa 1 characters. Just going to briefly pull up the creator list for Rosa 1 so you can have a look. And these two are Chinese creators on Bilibili, and I'll briefly show you how they scale their character. So this person, this is not a good example, the next one's a better example. This person here uses Demon's Touch to scale his character, and you can see this is a very expensive pair of gloves at 2000 FE. These are with 2 tier 1 mods, as well as Flaming Evil, which is very cheap. Right? The next creator, this is his Profound setup. He uses Kregel's Roar to scale on his helmet, right? This is a 500 to 800, but if you get this specific roll, which is important, it goes up to 1000 FE. He's also using Death Touch, which I'm also using. This is expensive corruption, but you actually don't need this corruption. It's a lot cheaper without the corruption. But those are the two content creators that I originally was looking at, and they took certain routes. I took the pieces I liked from them, put them on my character, but I'm scaling my character in a different way. Specifically, I'm using MagmaSkull here because MagmaSkull was very cheap, and I believe it gives you a lot of power for what it actually does. Pretty much, it's all just maths, right? This item gives you 20% hit damage for your affliction, but it gets increased by the amount of affliction effects you have in your character, and that gives you a multiplier on your helmet, which pretty much doubles my damage here. All right, next piece here is Broken Sun Ring. This is a relatively cheap amulet because people aren't really playing Demolisher skills this league. In a league where, for example, Rosa 1 is popular, then obviously this would be expensive. But this specific corruption was only, you can see here that it's under 200 FE, and simply just because it's not very popular. This is the best piece for your corruption, for progression, because this corruption gives you a lot of damage, and I'll walk over that when I get to the step-by-step part, but generally this is a really, really good upgrade. It's very cheap early, that gives you a lot of damage. Next piece is obviously the belt. For the belt, I mentioned before, I'm using Cohesion here, and that is to crutch my crit right now because of the previous snapshot. Previously, I was using specific gloves called Tyrant gloves, the non-mana version, which I'll just show you right here. So I'm using these gloves here. These give me Lucky Crit, which turns my 50% crit into 75%. But because we're dropping these gloves for a new pair of gloves called Death's Touch, we lose that crit. We need to get somewhere else. I'm currently using Cohesion to crutch my crit. Eventually, we'll be using a weapon suffix to it for it, but currently I'm just going to use Cohesion since it was the cheapest option. Now, this belt is very important. There's two things that are very important on this belt. One is that I'm getting block on this belt, which then helps me get to block cap. You can see here that I'm 99 and 100, so I actually need to divine this a little bit by using the Flame Sand here to roll into I hit 11% block here. So now if I hit 11%, I should be capped on both. And the other thing is this Reap line here. It reaps damage over time while inflicting Ignite. I'm a fire damage build. I inflict Ignite very easily, and this gives me Focus Blessings. So I'm just going to hop over to Slates here because this is just part of it. Over here, I have a mod that says gain 1 stack of Focus Blessings when reaping. And so because I have that belt mod, that's actually not giving me any damage. It's actually giving me Focus Blessings through the use of this Slate. And Focus Blessings, in case you're not sure, I'm not sure if it actually says in game, but you can see here, they're right here. They give you, I think it's 4% damage per stack, or 5% damage per stack, and stacks up to 4 times. So it's either 20% damage or 16% damage. I need to go double check on the wiki. All right, so on the wiki, it says 5% additional damage. So 4 of these is 20% additional damage, which is times 1.2, 20% more damage. Now for this ring is just very standard. It's just life, damage, and strength with triple res. And that's the same for this ring as well. This ring is armor, life, damage, doesn't really matter, right? Double 1 res and crit strike damage and Affliction Effect. Affliction Effect is very, very important because of the way MagmaSkull works. I'm going to briefly I'll probably just talk about it now, actually, since we're on this topic. So, MagmaSkull has this line that says -6 affliction per second for every 10% affliction effect. This means that if you have too much affliction, like Affliction Effect, you will pretty much have no affliction on the character because your affliction will be draining. The best way I can show you this is through taking off one of my slates. So you can see here, for example, if I take off this slate here, let me just look for one here. This slate here has plus 18 affliction per second. If I take this off and I go hit the dummy, look at the dummer's affliction. You see here that this is the affliction. It's ramping up slowly. It's gotten to 100 now, and currently it's staying at 100. That means I'm a little bit overcapped, right? If I then go ahead, take off another piece that has affliction gain on it. So this one here has affliction gain on it. I'm going to take this off now. And you can have a look at the diamond. You can see my affliction is still at 100, but it's like wavering, right? It's going down and up, down and up, and down and up. And it's like not always at 100. Now it's draining all the way down to 60 to 50, and it's keeping draining, and that's going to hit 0. Or bounce around. But you see my damage suffers a lot when this is not at max, simply because we need this as high as possible for the bonus affliction effect damage that comes from MagmaSkull. So the MagmaSkull hit damage here gives us affliction, as well as our use of True Flame on the passive tree. This node right here turns our affliction into extra hit damage. So that's kind of the fundamental idea, is that you need to get this mod or some sort of affliction gain mod in order to compensate for the amount of affliction and effect you have on your character. And that's in order to make sure you're always at 100 stacks, which you need to be, for example, for this mod to have effect, they minus all res, as well as your MagmaSkull to have maximum benefit. That's why, specifically on this ring, I have tier 3 affliction effect. I checked my character, I tried tier 2, I can't sustain it. Now I probably can because I upgraded my slates, but at the stage when I was crafting this, I ended up settling with tier 2 affliction effect, tier 3 affliction effect, simply because of this mechanic. I could not sustain tier 2 affliction effect with the current slates I had, which I then upgraded later. So for example, now I might come along and upgrade this to tier 2. All right, the rest of the piece of gear is pretty straightforward. This is a very cheap body armor. The only thing we care about from this body armor, you see here, it's like pretty cheap for the corruption. The main thing this body armor gives me is movement speed. This build does not have very good ways to get movement speed. And without movement speed, you're very slow because you're playing an auto-channeling build. If I take this off, it looks okay. However, it's a lot faster in maps and a lot better with movement speed. This chest piece also gives us the bonus effect of adding quick return to our demolisher skills, which means that we actually open up a support. You see here, I don't have quick return on here, so we have steamroll instead for an extra set of damage. In case you don't know what quick return does, it gives us demolisher charge restoration speed, so the recovery speed, as well as additional damage, but we get that all from our chest piece. That's why I'm still using this. Eventually, you will swap up this chest piece because it's considered not, like, it doesn't really give you much, right? It gives me the movement speed, which you can get somewhere else once you have money, and it also gives me the extra support, which you can just put into your links, right? You can just swap out steamroll for it, and then get more damage on the chest piece that, what do you call it? Makes it so that you deal more damage in the end when you combine all the maths together. Now, for the next piece of gear is Death's Touch, and that's because the other Demon's Touch is very, very expensive this league. So my Death's Touch, I bought for, I'll just briefly show you. I actually have it in my spreadsheet, which is probably just easier this way. So I brought my Death's Touch, you can see here, for 500 FE, and you actually don't need a corruption on it. I'm going to explain how this mechanic works. So Death's Touch here has a corrupted line here, but I'm just going to quickly pull up the non-corrupted version, just so you can understand how this works. I'm just going to take this off. Okay, so Death's Touch has a line here that says the critical strike rating on your weapon is fixed at 500 for the weapon. This mod acts like Sandstorm Visage in PB1, if you're familiar with that. However, the basic idea of it is that this crit chance mod, this is for every 1000 crit chance you have, you get 10% crit. This means that it fixes my crit at 500, right? So for my current stage of my character, it actually doesn't matter if I have this corruption or not, because my weapon itself is only at 500 crit rating, like on the weapon written right here. That's because I don't have the crit mod in my suffixes. This one here, attack critical strike rating for this gear. If I get 50%, that's 50% more crit. My base crit will go from 500 to 750, so this value will go to 750, which would then boost all my crit, because all my crit is stacking on my base crit. It will go up by 50% as well. So it's an extremely strong vector that I don't have on my weapon. And because I don't have that, I'm using Cohesion here, which pretty much acts like that, but it's not on my weapon, so it doesn't actually get affected by the Death's Touch mod. So you can actually play the setup without this corruption. This makes the setup a lot cheaper. However, I had the FE at the time, so I just bought the corruption, which means that when I upgrade my weapon to have the crit mod on it, I won't have to re-upgrade my gloves and pay for it again. Right? That's simply why I have this gloves. This gloves pretty much gives you a lot of damage, but the idea is simply the 83 additional damage for two-handed weapons. It just like gives you more damage there. And the attack speed doesn't matter, the crit chance is nice, this value here is nice, and obviously the corruption I just mentioned before, and the life gives me a bunch of life for defenses. The best corruption for this is a corruption on this line here, and a corruption on the bottom line here for the crit chance rating. Alright, next piece of gear is the boots. The boots are relatively straightforward. This is just boots that just give you additional damage whenever you use the Demolisher charge. They're very, very cheap. Very cheap, under 200 FE. The non-corruption version is a bit cheaper as well. I think it's like actually a 1 FE item, non-corrupted. Yeah, 1 FE, 5 FE item. But the 34% going up to 50% in my case, or going even higher, it goes up to 55%. It's a nice damage boost, so I bought this and it was cheap. Same for the Broken Sun Ring, right? Pretty much the same item in a different slot. Okay, that covers pretty much it for the gear. I'm going to talk about the weapon now. So my weapon is not optimized, and I just bought this for 350 FE, and I haven't bothered rolling it, right? There's much better ways to optimize this weapon, and the best way I can currently think of is turning this strength value into the melee damage here, and then turning one of these, so probably the element, doesn't matter, right? Whatever is the smallest one, turning one of these into the crit rating one here. This will pretty much give me enough crit, which would then mean I can drop cohesion from my belt and pick up something else from my belt, blending, which will be more damage there. So that's something that you can do here for optimization that I haven't gone up to yet. One thing I want to talk about this weapon is that the reason why we're playing a hammer is simply because this mod exists on hammers, which means whenever you stand still, you get double damage. That's what 100% additional damage is. It's times an extra 100%, so double damage in this case. A very important mod to get on your weapon. If you do not have this mod, your damage will suffer greatly. Something to keep in mind here. Okay, that pretty much wraps it up here. I'm going to talk about just stats on my character, so I'm just going to scroll through this so you can have a look yourself for benchmarks. We have 40% damage bonus. I have some damage bonus on block that's not being shown here. It's probably close to 1,000 or like 950. You see here that my main hand attack speed doesn't matter. Again, don't care about attack speed because it's all automated. We have 50% crit. Cohesion is not shown here, so it'll be 75% with the cohesion. We have this much crit rating, this much crit damage, quite on the low side, so that will be the next thing I'm going to work on. And just quickly scroll through here. You see the rest of it. This thing right here shows 229%. However, when I'm hitting the dummy, it goes up to like 334 or something, which is what I need. Right now, I'm just going to show info. You see here that we have 336, which is above the 233 benchmark, sorry, 236, which means I can go to the 0.9 threshold once I figure out how to get this off my belt. All right. And that's it for the rest of the damage stats. I'm just going to briefly go through the defensive stats as well. You can see my res is somewhat capped, nearly there. We have only 20k armor on the low end. We want to get to like 50k for profound, ideally. And our block is capped. We have 60% block ratio, and those are the rest of the stats. Okay, now movement speed, 85% without the chest piece active. And that should give you a good idea of what you're looking for. Okay, let's move on to the next piece, which is going to be... we'll just go through talents. Actually, yeah, we'll just go through talents. All right. Just going to quickly just show you this. You can adapt this to your case. I'll talk a little bit about things that I decided to go with versus things that you can click yourself. It's pretty much personal preference. You should adapt this to how your character state is looking at. For example, I wanted more regen, so I've clicked these 4 nodes here. If you want more damage, you can click these crit nodes here, right? Now for Onslaughter, I'm using a specific prism here. This prism is very cheap. It cost me, I think, around 50 FE. So if I quickly go to the prism trade house right now, you'll be able to see in my background here. This one right here, 20 FE at this current stage, but when I bought it, it was 50 FE on the cheaper side. And the actual mods on it don't actually matter, right? This is like erosion res, right? I just clicked it for fun to see what I got, and that's what I got, so I settled with that. The idea behind this is we're using this to replace one of our nodes here to give us 35% additional attack damage for each different Warcry cast recently, and with 99% minus Empower skill effect. So in our case, we're using 2 Warcries, we're using Resurrection and we're using Raging, so both of these will give us 35% damage, like from that node there, which ends up being 70% more damage from the node there, which is much better than the nodes without it, right? The ones without would probably be like 40% or so. The rest of the tree here, one thing I want to point out is the space damage nodes here you really want, and this one here I really like because paralysis is from my pet, from the red umbrella. This gives me 15% damage increase. Rest of it's kind of just damage, crit, whatever, some life here as well. One thing to note is I'm clicking strength here because that was a stat I was missing, so that gives us some damage as well. All right, next one is Warlord Tree, and this is the key node that we're using for our Affliction Effect. That's how we're turning our Affliction into hit damage as well as the MagmaSkull helmet. These both work together, and that gives us a lot of damage here. One thing also to note is that we're converting our Fist to Fire, obviously because this says Fire hit damage, so we need to convert to Fire. That's why I'm converting to Fire here. And the rest of it's pretty standard, just crit nodes, infiltration, and over here, we're getting some base ignite damage, and then we're getting some Affliction Effect here. So again, when I was talking about the helmet previously, whenever you get an Affliction Effect, you need to get Affliction Gain, and so we get some Affliction Gain here. I think these counteract itself because it's minus 6 Affliction per second. So here it says minus 6 Affliction per second for 10%, and over here on this specific node, I'm getting 45%, and I'm getting 24, right? So in this case, 24 divided by 4 is 6. 24 divided by 6 is 4, and then 4 times 10 is 40%. So we're 5% Affliction Effect over, this being self-sustaining in terms of the loss of Affliction from the MagmaSkull helmet. And my last tree, I've decided to click Sentinel here, and it's because I like defenses. I'm not a really big fan of dying a lot in Torchlight. I know a lot of people like to play really glass cannon builds. I just don't really like it. I like to make sure my defenses are on par with my offenses because I just enjoy not dying, right? Something to note is that you can click spell block here, right? I'm not clicking spell block here because I'm getting my spell block from my traits, so my hero memories. So if you don't have spell block, you click it here. That's the best way to get it. And the rest of it's all pretty standard. You pretty much start taking away from this tree as soon as you can cap your block from somewhere else. And one thing to note is that because I'm clicking a defensive node here, if I click a damage node, for example, if I go last stand and I go to the dummy DPS, my DPS will go up a lot again, right? But my defenses drop a lot, and obviously that's just padding. So I prefer to have high defenses. So you see here we're nearly like 180, nearly 200 billion DPS. We hit 200 billion DPS. But I'd rather have the defense aspect than the extra damage. Right, and the next thing to talk about is slates. So my slate currently has Affliction Effect. You need to get a certain amount of this on your character in order to sustain Affliction. So in this case, I have 1, I have 2, I have 3, I have 4, none here, none here, and none here. Right, so I've got 4 sources of this. The next thing you're looking for is any relevant damage node here. There's a lot of them. I'm going to let you search for these yourself so I don't like screw the market up. But the general idea is anything that you read gives you additional damage for a melee character, for slams, for area, anything like that, you can run this yourself. This one looks really good on paper because it's 48% additional, which is really high, but you have to stand still, right? So you have to be tanky for this to be active. So I actually think it's probably better to get one that's just 30% damage always instead of 48% damage while standing still so that you can run around the boss and be safe. But this does have some synergy with our weapon mod, which requires me to stand still. Right here, you can see here that this requires me to stand still. Otherwise, this doesn't activate. So there's some synergy with standing still. You kind of do want to stand still, but at the same time, you can argue that another one is better that lets you move around. All right, the next of my slates I'm just going to walk through here. This slate here is Demolition Charge Restoration, plus this 10% chance to restore on block. These 3 mods, this mod Trauma mod here is useless. This is a brick, right? These 2 are good. You're looking for relevant mods. That's really it. Don't need to copy exactly what they have. Over here, Affliction and the Reaping that I talked about earlier with the belt. Over here, it's just Affliction. Affliction, attack block, spell block, right, and the 40% damage. Paralysis effect and demolition charge recovery. Demolition charge recovery and the minimum war cries, right? So take what I have on here and look for the cheapest combination of them yourself. Don't exactly copy this 1-to-1-to-1 because if everyone copies this 1-to-1-to-1, it's going to be very expensive, right? Look, for example, you see these 2 mods you need. You see these 2 mods you need. Put them all into one of the searches on the trade house and look for a combination of these together. Okay, that's going to pretty much cover it here. I'm going to talk about the hero traits. So to start, we're taking these 3. This makes it so that our skill is auto-channeling. The way this hero trait works, it's worded really badly in here, but the general idea is that when you press it, you have this little aura around you, it vacuums enemies to you, and you gain damage stats while in this aura. The general gist is all you have to worry about is before you get automation, you're clicking this one. Once you get automation, you're clicking this one. This lets you auto channel, which makes you really easy to play the character. You just point your mouse and it runs automatically. And one thing to keep in mind is that you really want this specific Lunaris thing, whatever it's called, the Revive mod. The reason why this one is really, really strong is because it opens up a slot here. And by putting a memory in here and giving your trait 2 levels, you can actually boost the level of this slot here, which is normally unboostable. In this case, for Rosa, you're boosting a 20% damage to 26% damage, so 6% more damage here. And the idea is you want to stack as many of these together, right? You stack a lot of more damage. That's why I think that this is the best one for this specific build, simply because it's interaction with getting damage here. For example, if I have a memory here with +2 to hero trait, it would go up to 4. I'll go from 26%, I'll add another 12% damage onto here. I'll go to, 38% more damage, like additional damage from this specific node here. That's why I think this memory with this Awaken effect is the best. And one thing to keep in mind is that trait level is inherent, so it actually doesn't get decreased by the decrease mod here. All right, rest of them I'm just going to walk through briefly. This one here is just damage crit, damage crit, right? The main thing you want to make sure is that this is strength because you actually lack this stat. So you want to get this to get your damage scaling more efficiently. Over here, you want to get life, you want to get damage, right? Very standard here. And over here, I'm going to get movement speed. Very important because this build lacks movement speed. Here's a good source of movement speed that you can get, as well as swiftness, as well as the chest piece, as well as there's a Kismet that you can get movement speed on. But just make sure you get movement speed here. Again, don't look for exactly what I have here. Look at pretty much just get damage, right? Damage and block. You want to get those 2 stats on your memories. So in my case, These two are just pure damage. Over here, I'm getting 14% spell block. And then over here, I have 19% spell block and 21% attack block. And then a 7% spell block roll that's been reduced by 59%. As well as a crit roll here in damage. Right. Because this one's being reduced by so much because of the cheap version of this mod here, you just go with whatever on the rolls and the implicit. Strength is better here. You can fish for better rolls. The general idea is you want to cap your block with spell block, cap your attack and spell block with these memories, as well as the mod on your belt. All right, on to Pactspirits. So specifically, you want a few Pactspirits. The main one I would say is core is Firewing, because it gives you a lot of Affliction Effect, which is generally quite hard to get without actually sacrificing a lot on your character. If you don't have this, you can take this off and put any other pet in. However, do know that you'll probably lose 20 to 30% DPS. Depending on how good that pet that you put it in is, you may not lose as much, but just keep that in mind. The next one we're using is Red Umbrella for Paralysis. We're using this for Affliction Effect, and we're using this for Warcry Effect. You can play without this pet from my testing. I think you actually can make do without it. However, what this pet does is it boosts the effect of your Raging Warcry, right here, which then boosts the amount of Demolition Charge recovery rate you get, which then lets you barely scrape into the next tier. You can see here that on my current character, if I just quickly go to the info section, you see that we're barely above the 233 benchmark, and that's simply because I'm using this pet. If I don't have this pet on, I won't be able to make this benchmark without having to use a slate. Now, this is not the end-all be-all, because there's other ways to get Demolition Charge, like on Prisms. However, it's something that in the early game that you probably want to get early. It just makes it a little bit easier. If you don't have this pet, you can put in any of the other damage pets like Kitty, or you can put in any of the purples that are relevant for attack damage, right? And these attack damage pets, you chuck these in. They will work. However, this does let you barely squeeze into the next benchmark, which is like around 10% more damage. Okay, and one more thing to mention is the Kismets, which I forgot. You see here that I'm actually using some of them. So I'm using Strength, using Resistances to cap my res, as well as Resistance here and a Resistance here. Over here I'm using Strength. And I'm using specifically these two big Kismets. So I'm using this one here that says, your injury buffer is fixed at 0, but you restore 10% missing life when taking hit damage with an interval of 0.05. This is pretty much just restore 10% of missing life on hit. And same for this one, you need 2 of these. These are very cheap. They're like 70 FE each. I only picked them because I think they're pretty good defensively. Like numbers-wise, they seem very strong. This one here is Warcry buff effect. And I need this one just to get enough buff effect to scrape past the benchmark as I showed before, like the threshold of 233. So in my case, again, I showed briefly before, it was 236. And so that's where I'm getting a tiny bit of Warcry effect to get past the next benchmark. You can do something else, right? You can get Warcry effect somewhere else on your character or in your gear, and you don't need to use this. One thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to remove Affliction Effect here. And some of these skill effect durations or Warcry effect here, you don't really want to touch. And the next one is just crit right here, right? You can eventually Kismet these off. However, attack speed, you can Kismet off because you don't care about that stat. And then these stats here are all relevant to your build, so you can remove them. And over here, I'm just removing a tiny bit as much as I can. All right. On to this section where I'm going to cover exactly what upgrades you need and how they progress your damage. So over here in my spreadsheet, which I'll link in the description below, you'll be able to see all the upgrades I did, all the cost of the upgrades, and how much it approximately upgraded my DPS. So for example, from my original video of 10 billion DPS, which is my previous update, I got a tier 1 weapon like the one I showed you that cost me 350 FE and it doubled my damage. Then I used the attack plating, which didn't cost me any money, and it pretty much like gave me a tiny bit of damage, but I don't think it was significant enough to put here. But it was a bit more. And then I fixed all my memories. So I turned my memories into yellow. I got a strength memory in the first slot, which you need. And then I scrapped them all up to max and I rolled for reasonable mods. So not perfect mods on the hero traits. These ones here, they weren't perfect until I re-rolled them later. But that was kind of a start of it, right? That gave me like another 10 billion DPS. Cost me around 300 FE, just a hand-wavy estimate of all the costs together. And then my MagmaSkull cost me 50 FE. It put me from 30 bill to 34 bill. My boots cost me 40 FE. They put me from 34 bill to 37 bill, approximately, right? These are all approximate numbers. It's very hard to kind of say how much exactly damage that you get because there's crits and there's so much variance there. But just keep this in mind. Next thing is Focus Blessing on the Reap. So this is the specific belt setup that I talked about. We have Reap Ignite, and then we have Focus Blessing with gain Focus Blessing while reaping. So that specific setup there, and that gave me 20% DPS. We used some Strength Fates to give us a little bit more damage. And then we got a Corrupted Broken Sun Ring. So that's the amulet right here. This one here, I pushed it from 30% to 65%. I re-rolled all my memories to tier 1 mods. So it cost me another 100 FE. And that was just getting some purples that I had. I just went straight all to yellow mods. So specifically what I mean by that is these mods here, how they're both yellow, these ones here. And then I tried an expensive MagmaSkull Corruption, but I ended up reselling it because it did not give me that much damage. This is something to keep in mind that I don't think this is great. First, the expensive Magma Corruption I'm talking about is one where the third line is corrupted here. So if I quickly show you what that looks like on the trade site, you'll be able to see that it is this one here with the tier 0 affix like this. This is around, you see here, that's probably around 600 FE or so. I think I bought mine for 500 FE. You see here that around 500 FE or so. But this is not actually that great. When I tested the damage of it, it barely gave me any damage. It gave me like a tiny bit here. You can see here that it gave me a tiny bit of damage here. But for the cost, it's not worth it, right? So I ended up reselling this item because I didn't think it was worth the budget. And I ended up using that money somewhere else. So again, the reason why I actually don't think it's that great is because we actually don't have that much Affliction Effect. There's no stat for this in the game. But you see here that the more Affliction Effect you have, so if you have 100% Affliction Effect, it doubles this 21 to 42. But in order to get up to 115%, you need 500% Affliction Effect, which is a lot of Affliction Effect. We're pretty much only getting our Affliction Effect from here. We get some of here. We get some on the tree here, on the Warlord tree. Right here. And our pet, which gives us 120%. 80% while on full life, plus 20% from these small nodes here. Or 40% from these nodes here, right? So it's 120%. So we're nowhere near getting to the 500% cap of this specific mod here. So it ends up not giving that much damage. And this corruption here with the 10% additional hit damage, which is multiplicative again, ends up being much more damage. Also, one thing I forgot is that we actually do get Affliction Effect from Cataclysm support because it actually gives us Affliction Effect on the support. It's not written anywhere else. So that's why I ended up not thinking this upgrade was good, and I ended up selling this upgrade after testing it. Next thing I mentioned before is the Affliction Effect on Ring and another Affliction Slate. So this put me up a bit more damage. Affliction Effect is very strong for scaling damage, but you want to balance it, right? You want to make sure you have enough Affliction gain, enough Affliction Effect, not too much Affliction Effect, otherwise your Affliction will go to 0, like I showed earlier. And the idea is that you want to min-max this aspect and fill it with it yourself. It's a bit annoying, not as smooth as other builds, but you gain a lot of power for it, for filling with this and making sure it works properly. So that's why I had to get another slate, and that cost me. I didn't write a price for it because I actually just crafted this myself, right? This ring, and I had the slate already, so I just swapped around some stuff. But here, make sure that notes here, you need to look at the affliction amount on the enemy. If it ever dips below 100, you need more affliction count, like the plus 18 per second, right? Or you can reduce the affliction effect you have on your character if you have it on rings or whatever, right? You must sustain 100 stacks without dipping for max damage, and that's simply because these slates here give you minus res at max affliction, right? If your affliction is dipping below 100, you're not getting this effect here, which is a lot of damage because you're stacking a lot of it. All right, next one here is just corners and starlights. So specifically in game, that was just these three thing here. I ended up upgrading these. So the main thing is these are expensive. Starlight was pretty expensive. This is like pretty expensive. Oh, this one's okay actually. This one was like relatively expensive, like 100 something. So those were the three upgrades. I still have this one I can upgrade as well. So there's some work to be done here. And this one was one that I had previously. I just kept rebuying it and re-rolling the talents. So that cost me a decent amount, mainly because starlights and corners are pretty expensive for good mods. Next thing I did was the prism craft. This was just for fun. You don't have to do this. Does not do much. Just this thing here. I just was wondering how this thing worked. So I clicked it until I got whatever. Does not matter here. And I got the Warcraft Kismet, as I mentioned before, to barely scrape into the next tier. That specifically is this Kismet right here. This one up here, to give me the next tier of Demolisher Charge Recovery. Now, here's the biggest upgrade that I did, was the Death Touch. It cost me 500 FE. Again, I mentioned before that you don't need a corruption. I'll mention again that you do not need this corruption. This specific corrupted mod here, you do not need this unless you have crit rating here. But the prices were 200 for a non-corrupted, 400 for a corrupted. I bought the 400 one because I'm like, okay, it's only 200 more, right? I might just buy it so I can eventually upgrade this weapon to get crit strike rating on the weapon, which lets me drop this belt blending for something else. So again, keep that in mind here. You could start with a non-corrupted version if your weapon does not have extra attack crit rating for this weapon. So specifically, the mod I'm talking about is this one here. Attack critical strike rating for this gear. Specifically, the wording for this gear, you cannot use that mod with the gloves if they're not corrupted. However, you can use this mod here because this mod is global crit chance, right? So what I recommend is there's 2 ways to solve your crit before you get the corruption. The first one is cohesion on your belt. The second one, well, it's again cohesion on your slates. So it's still technically the first one. You can get cohesion here as well, but it's not really that optimal. And then the last one is getting crafted suffix for this line here, critical strike rating, not the one above, the one below. As soon as you upgrade your gloves to remove that line, the downside, you can then look towards getting the crit strike rating advanced affix, this one here, which will then boost your crit up a lot, right? Because this is, again, multiplicative on the base crit of the weapon. So again, just keep that in mind. Now back to the spreadsheet. And the last one I got was 2 Prophet Kismets. The reason why, so the specific one I'm talking about is this one here, that gives me the life restore when taking damage. This means that we get a lot of good mitigation and a lot of regen. Not regen, but it's just mitigation. Because this, in combination with us blocking every attack, right? Because we have capped block here, you can see that we both have capped block here, that lets us block a lot. And then you have slates that give us life on block. So here, I think it was one of these. 10% for 15% life on block. And then there's a note on the tree, missing 1% missing when blocking. So all of those combined together give us some mitigation regen, mitigation layer, as well as the regen here, and then the permanently running resurrection war cry give us some life regen. So it's a combination of a few different factors to give us some sustain in maps. However, obviously, we need to improve DPS, right? Because we need to improve DPS and improve defenses because we just got a profound. So work to be done there. So that's it. That's all the upgrades from 10 billion to 100 billion. I hope this makes it really easy for you to follow. Again, look for these values here. Look for which ones that you think are more efficient. Look for the prices specifically, right? You need to make sure the prices are valuable. If everyone just follows this from top to bottom and there's a lot of people playing this build, then the prices will be very expensive, right? So just keep that in mind. So look for different ways to scale your character and then look for the most efficient. It takes time and research. For example, some stuff I haven't done is activation mediums. That's something I could do. And there's also better weapon, the crit mod that I was talking about. There's a few different upgrades that we'll be working on, as well as tier 1 rings, which I just don't have. Like I should probably do that next. Tier 1 ring, tier 1 ring, tier 1 belt we don't have. So there's still some work to be done in all these different slots here, as well as blendings on rings as well, which I'm missing. Okay, so hopefully that makes it clear. I'm going to keep pushing this character, right? We're going to try and get this guy to deep space eventually. I don't know how long it would take because it's actually my first time in Profound, so I'm just going to keep playing because I enjoy the character. I enjoy gearing, and the min-maxing experience has been very fun. But yeah, if you need help finding the spreadsheet, it'll be in the description below. I've talked through some of these conversion stuff already in the previous video, so if you're interested in that, you can look at that. If you need guides for Bilibili, they're located here, but obviously they're in Chinese. There's some notes here on the Demolisher recovery, as well as some general benchmarks for survivability and DPS for different maps. These are just general benchmarks. And then as well as some text on pets as well, in case you're interested there. And the main thing is just to keep an eye out on the notes for the leveling here if you need these. Like they give you some, trying to put as much info as I can from my experience of playing this build. All right. So yeah, that's going to wrap it up for my character. I'm going to make another update once I get some more progress. Obviously, we have some work to do since we just hit 100 bill. So once we get from 100 bill to maybe a little bit more, I'll make an update once it's significant enough and walk through each of the steps. But the idea is that I wanted to document my entire character, my learning progression, my decision making, and hopefully whoever is interested can look at this, learn from it, and apply it to their own characters, or come try this character, which I think is really strong and extremely underrated. Okay, that's going to wrap it up here. I'm out, and thanks for watching. Oh, again, if you have any comments, put them in the if you have any questions, put them in the comments below. Okay, I'm out.